and this is a United Nations convention. A country exclusively controls the sea up to 370 kilometers away from its coast. It's their exclusive economic zone. And the Scarborough Shoal falls well within that limit for the Philippines, but China does not care. It does not follow international law. Instead, Beijing tries to peddle this, the infamous 9-dash line. China came up with this. It first published these 9 dashes in the mid-20th century, and it declared that everything within these dashes was Chinese territory. Everything within the 9 dashes belongs to China. What's the basis of this claim?
What is the basis of these claims? Distinguished officers, esteemed academics, strategic thinkers, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is my honor to speak on the subject of UNCLOS and FONOPS to this august gathering.
Look at the map.
The scope of the presentation is as shown on the slide. We started early 1600s with maritime law. It was all about power and not principles. We started with mare liberum, which was the concept of open seas, challenged by Spain and Portugal, to mare clausum, which was the doctrine of closed seas. And thereafter, the new countries like England and Netherlands used state-approved privateers. And incidentally, the movie Pirates of Caribbean is based on such privateering. Interestingly, the first attempts to legally define territorial waters were governed by the firing range of the cannon, which was limited to 3 nautical miles. Till 1800, maritime law was fragmented and customary law was inconsistently applied by powerful players. This all changed with the Truman's Proclamation of 1945, where US claimed continental shelf as a natural extension of its landmass, starting a race for similar claims. And between 1945 to 58, advances in oil exploration and industrial fishing exposed legal gaps which required codifications. This set the stage for Geneva Convention. And first, a major codification effort was UNCLOS 1 in 1958. They had 4 separate conventions: territorial seas, high seas, continental shelf, and fisheries. However, that also failed. They were unable to decide the limits of the territorial sea. There was discussion between 3 nautical mile, 12 nautical mile or more. And similarly, UNCLOS 2 also could not reach consensus due to Cold War divisions. Thereafter, UNCLOS was adopted for the first time in 1982, but was implemented only in 1994. This has 320 articles under 17 parts with 9 annexures. 168 countries have signed it. India is included in that. And the major non-ratifiers include US, who has issues with deep sea binding, Israel, because they don't want to share their resources with PLO, Turkey, who has got boundary disputes with Greece, Iran and Venezuela, again because of regional disputes. This slide basically depicts all the maritime zones. I'll not go into the details. I think the audience is already basically aware of most of it. I'll just scan through a few of the important components which are important for taking the discussion forward. The internal waters, landward of baseline, foreign vessels have no right of innocent passage. Territorial sea, again, innocent passage is permitted to foreign vessels under certain conditions. Contiguous zone extends up to 24 nautical miles from the baseline, where the coastal states have the right to prevent or punish violations of custom, immigration, sanitary, and fiscal. EEZ, this is the most important one, up to 200 nautical miles from baseline. Here the word exclusive is deliberate, and the coastal states do not have full sovereignty, but it has sovereignty over the natural resources. Now I'll cover the other features, especially the low tide elevation. These are only basically visible during low tide, and they remain submerged during high tide. No territorial sea or anything else. There is one basically shift. If a low tide elevation is within 12 nautical miles of the territorial sea, then the territorial sea extent gets enlarged. You can see, which is shown by this bulge on the screen. But if it is outside 12 nautical miles, then the low tide elevation does not have any kind of maritime rights. Uh, Thereafter, we'll cover rocks. This is covered under Article 121. Basically, if a feature cannot sustain human habitation or economic life, and it also remains above water during the low tide, it is classified as rocks. So the human habitation is something which is most important. It is only entitled to 12 nautical miles of territorial sea. The islands are basically naturally formed landmass which is above water at high tide, which can sustain human habitation or economic life. And this has everything, whatever a normal territory or mainland would have. That means territorial sea, contiguous zones, EEZ, etc. Let us now look at the UNCLOS into the real world setting, which is basically the South China Sea, where legal definitions are meeting strategic contestations. If you look at Spratly chain, there are around 26 features which are above high tide, and yet only 2 or 3 qualify as islands. Rest are all rocks or low tide elevations. That means the maximum they can claim is 12 nautical miles of territorial sea or nothing at all. Incidentally, building structures on submerged features like China's construction of Mischief Reef do not create any sovereign rights. They do not become islands, and they are only entitled to 500 meters of safety zone. This basically is a map which shows the China's maritime claim, which is approximately 2 million square kilometer or 22% of its landmass. Also, in this photograph, what is shown is the 3 key island groups, Paracels, Spratly, and Scarborough, which forms an equilateral triangle, giving it strategic defense in depth. Also, one more important, very important point is that these dashed lines, the China's 9 dashed line, lack geographical coordinates and are inconsistently placed, which basically undermine its legal validity. This slide shows the case of Spratly Island, which is a maritime minefield of overlapping claims between Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, Philippines, and even Taiwan. China wants to stake claim to fraudulent maritime zones associated with land features which are contested and very far from its borders. UNCLOS is clear: even if a state has sovereignty over a feature, maritime zones it generates must be subject to agreement with neighboring states. But China has been asserting itself, and basically they are manufacturing jurisdiction basically by occupation, and they have also lost the case in tribunal in 2016. Having examined how maritime zones are generated, we can now shift our focus to the concept of innocent passage, which is again the basis for FONOPS. UNCLOS permits all ships, including warships, to pass through states' territorial seas, provided passage is continuous, expeditious, and not prejudicial to peace or security of the coastal state. There are other factors like submarines should show their flag, etc. And any activity which is beyond this transit, such as weapons, exercises, or surveillance, disqualifies it as innocent. And this is the root cause of most of the problems. India requires prior notice for all foreign warships entering territorial waters under Section 4 of MZI Act of 1976. India chooses a cautious path, balancing international laws with its own national interests. UNCLOS extends high seas freedom of navigation, of overflight, and of submarine cables into EEZ under Article 58. However, these freedoms are not absolute, and they remain subject to coastal states' rights. The only problem becomes over here is that the military activities in EEZ are not clearly earmarked in UNCLOS, and therefore that creates a room of some kind of a chaos. This slide shows a divergent UNCLOS interpretations regarding military activities in EEZ, what different countries are following. Major powers like US assert freedom, including military maneuvers, while coastal states especially Developing nations view such activities as intrusive and seek prior consent.
The USS Mylius, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, conducted a freedom of navigation operation, FONOPS, near the Paracel Islands on March 24th before continuing in the South China Sea, according to the U.S. 7th Fleet.
So the US has been conducting this freedom of navigation, but interestingly, US is not a party to UNCLOS, primarily due to its objection over Part 11 on the deep seabed mining. Yet it claims to uphold UNCLOS provisions as customary international law. And this selective engagement adds duplicity to their arguments. US FONOPS program began in 1979 under President Carter. It follows dual approach diplomatic protest by State Department and naval operations that they carried out through their Department of Defense. US has challenged 68 countries so far, and it includes India also. So there are basically two legal pillars that underpin US approach to FONOPS. First is the persistent objector doctrine. This doctrine rests on a simple but powerful legal premise that if a state persistently and clearly objects to a rule while it's emerging, it remains exempt from its application. And FONOPS as a physical form is a demonstration of this objection. And the second principle is Vienna Convention of Law of Treaties. This principle states that if excessive maritime claims go unchallenged over time, they risk being accepted even if they deviate from the original text. FONOPS in this context serves as a preventive mechanism to avoid such practices. Unlike the persistent objector doctrine, this principle applies only to treaty parties and focuses on interpretation and not on the exemption. Between 1991 and 2022, US has conducted FONOPS against 68 countries, including 7 European nations. This slide shows details of countries against whom US has exercised FONOPS. We are also there, one of them. And if you can see on this slide, the excessive maritime claims generally fall into these 5 broad categories. Most of them are towards the 3 and 4 and 5 are the ones which are maximum in numbers. This timeline highlights frequency of FONOPS over 3 decades, and several countries, including India, have been challenged over a number of years. So now we'll take few examples. This is the 2015 FONOP near Subi Reef, which was a low tide elevation in Spratly Islands. And as a low tide elevation, Subi Reef does not have any territorial sea under UNCLOS, and therefore US was conducting FONOPS to challenge these claims of China. And again, we can see USS Curtis Wilbur's 2016 transit near Triton Island in Paracels. Unlike Subi Reef in the previous slide, Triton Island qualifies for a territorial sea, yet US again conducted FONOPS to challenge the claim and stating that innocent passage does not require any permissions. Once again, this is USS Decatur, which executed a non-innocent passage in 2016, deliberately navigating through individual 12 nautical miles zones of features, rejecting China's unlawful straight baseline claim. The FONOPS demonstrated that scattered maritime features cannot be grouped to generate expanded territorial seas under UNCLOS. So all these are small islands, and they had created straight baselines, and that is why the Americans undertook the FONOPS. Having seen the US FONOPS in broader context, let's now see FONOPS which are conducted against India's maritime claim. Basically, US has raised objections on following 5 major points against India, which is prior, we have asked for prior notification for foreign warships entering the territorial sea, prior permission for military exercise in EEZ and continental shelf. We have declared Gulf of Myanmar as historic waters. We want 24 nautical mile security zone around our key installations, and we require 24-hour prior notice for vessels carrying hazardous cargo into the EEZ. Having seen pattern of US FONOPs directed against India and basis of their objection, it is important to highlight that India's maritime stance is not random. It is grounded in domestic legislation and sovereign interpretation of UNCLOS. Our Maritime Zones of India Act 1976 actually predates UNCLOS, but substantially aligns with its provisions. India ratified UNCLOS in 1995 with clear declarations under Article 310, particularly preserving our right to regulate military activities in our maritime zone. This Article 310 is very important, and before signing, we had actually raised our concerns. These positions stem from genuine security concerns, and we have consistently upheld them despite repeated external challenges. India's legal posture is deliberate, consistent, and firmly rooted in both international law and sovereign elements. The US has been always positioning itself as a champion of maritime freedom, but its own practices leave a lot to be said. In 1983, through Presidential Proclamation 5030, the US declared a 200 nautical mile EEZ, affirming that it would not hinder freedom of navigation or scientific research. But lo and behold, by 2020, it reversed her stance and through Proclamation 10071 demanded foreign vessels to seek permission for marine research in EEZ. Even more striking is the 1989 US-Russian joint statement where both nations agreed that innocent passage would not require prior notification or authorization. Yet in 2003, US objected when Russia asked for 1 hour prior notice, exposing how US has been shifting positions as per convenience. So UNCLOS basically was a grand bargain for coastal rights in return for maritime freedom. But today, that balance stands tested. Persistent divergence in state practices, especially between major powers and coastal nations like India, undermines legal clarity. Military activities, as I had previously also mentioned in EEZ and historic waters, and basically the undefined term like military maneuvers continue to breed contestations. India's firm sovereign interpretation of UNCLOS, grounded in domestic law and consistent state practice, represents not a deviation from international law, but rather a principled safeguarding of balance. Seas may appear boundless, but so are legal and strategic currents that shape them. India will continue to sail with resolve, upholding international law, but not at the cost of its maritime sovereignty. As we chart our course forward, India remains committed to being both a responsible maritime power and a steadfast guardian of its oceanic interests. Thank you, Jai Hind, and Shah Novarana.